Welcome to Divorced Muslims, A Second Chance, the podcast that uplifts voices for both divorced and single Muslims. Alhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah amma ba'd. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Brothers and sisters, welcome to another episode in our podcast known as Divorced Muslims, A Second Chance. In this podcast, we are joined by a guest who was also a guest in season 2. Brother Sigma, how you doing, buddy?
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, cannot complain.
Good, bro. Although I've asked you this in the last season, I've got to ask you this in the next season as well. Give us an introduction of yourself.
I am a volunteer by nature. I work in finance as per my career. I am definitely a student of academia, and it's a pleasure to be here.
And it's a pleasure to have you, my friend. Okay, so season 3, I'm going to start off with a very hot topic, and that is marriage apps. In my opinion, the most utilized method in looking for a spouse in the British Muslim community has to be these apps. So with that theme in mind, I want to ask you, have apps improved the marriage search or have they damaged the marriage search?
I think it's best to pretty much start, be objective from the offset. We're not here necessarily to speak about feelings or digital gossip. We're here to address what I believe is kind of the systematic collapse of the British Muslim family structure. And I guess, I think for too long, our communities have been, led by, what I remember this to be is the Ruwa Bidah, basically the unqualified voices, and the digital echo chambers that kind of prioritize victimhood over actual truths. Now, I guess to answer your question here, have apps damaged the search? Well, I think we've got to take a step back and think actually what is the actual damage that we've had. I guess when we ask ourselves why is the search so difficult, we've got to look at things like the enclave effect. I'll go into it more detail further down, but essentially we're looking at the rise of insular cultural groups that only consume information validating their own specific traumas. This pretty much creates, a feedback loop of confirmation bias. And subsequently, this actually triggers a constant amygdala hijack. I read about all of this sort of stuff previously. It's so fascinating. Where metacognition, this is pretty much thinking about your own thinking, shuts down, and it's actually replaced by emotional poisoning and what we see online, which is what's called a female solipsism, which is basically the belief that their own feelings are the actual own. Now, answering the question whether apps have damaged the search, I think what apps have actually done is they've highlighted the issues within each community, within each individual person.
Okay, but if you were to choose, have the apps served its purpose? Meaning, the objective of an app surely would be to assist people getting married. Have they served its purpose? Have they been detrimental to the society, or have they actually improved the search and helped people get married? If you were to give your opinion on this, what would you say?
I would say they've given people another opportunity to reject someone.
Interesting.
Apps have, I think they haven't just damaged the actual search. They've pathologized it. Essentially, they've turned something or someone into a problem, and just to put into perspective, what people do is their experiences in real life, anecdotal experiences. You've got the rise of the Dawa culture. You've got the rise of the female boss lady type of culture. Now, what's happened is on social media these days, and this is what's flowing through these apps, by the way, when you're speaking to individuals, we're seeing what's called the Dunning-Kruger effect. Low competence people, individuals with zero track record of building a home, but giving authoritative advice. You've got unqualified therapists giving life advice. We've replaced, and this is where I think answers the previous question. I guess is well, the previous point I made in terms of the issue within the family structure is that we've replaced the wali who acted as a firewall against low value behavior with pretty much replaced with unregulated emotional browsing. This sort of deparenting of the search is a rejection of our communities, but also it's something that even the non-Muslims did this prior to the 60s, you know, sort of things. Rejecting of parents as your or your wali as your protector. This stuff is measurable. TI clinics have had huge usage now. The burnout of, emotional burnout because there's no protection of our hire. People discard parental counsel. What happens now is an individual will go online, they'll pick and choose what they want. They won't have any counsel with anyone of value, their parents. They'll go all the way up until I've decided this is the person I'm going to marry. Now I'm going to give my paternal line their duty and say, right, this is the person I'm marrying. I've taken the authority away from you. This is what I'm doing. And I think that's kind of one in many issues that we're having. And I don't want this to look as a attack on sisters. This is also a message to the brothers. The fact is, a wali isn't a barrier; he's a firewall. If you take what people have done is taken down this firewall. Now they're complaining about the virus. We're rewarding perfection on a screen while ignoring, I guess, what they call the actor non verba, of actual character. And that's, I think, the biggest problem we have within our society now. People are kind of living in an enclave system, which is the uncle type of wisdom. You're getting it wisdom off of people that are unqualified. They are destroying your ability to think. As a result, we're kind of trapping ourselves into a digital echo chamber, and then we're replacing intellect with emotional poisoning.
Yeah, okay. Interesting perspective there. And I think you've kind of covered my next two sort of questions in relation to apps, where I was going to ask people genuinely serious on that app, or is it just a case of emotionally browsing? Briefly, what would you say on that?
I think it's a combination of two. I think people are serious, but what choice gives them is the ability to doom scroll. Doom scrolling, we know to be studied as a hugely reactive issue towards our dopamine. We are constantly swiping, doom scrolling YouTube and all the other apps, looking for that dopamine hit. That dopamine hit will never revive because we're pretty much poisoning ourselves emotionally to keep looking for something that's going to be perfect for us. It's kind of like a dog chasing a car. What's the dog going to do once it's caught that car? Doesn't know what to do with it. And I think a lot of people are finding themselves in that position now. And a lot of it is to answer the question if people are actually serious, for example. Yeah, they're serious. But how do you tell if someone's serious? When are you available? Are you only available 2 hours a week during the day whilst you're scrolling an app? Are you approachable on the street in a halal way? Are you approachable on the weekend? Do you make yourself available on the weekend? Or are you babysitting your nieces and nephews? If you're taking yourself out of the equation to be approached or to be accessed, the only way to access you is just before you go to bed whilst you're swiping away. Yeah, absolutely, you're limiting yourself. Then I would say you're not necessarily serious for marriage.
And the final question on this is, do apps reward honesty or perfection?
Okay. I can look at my own personal example here. If I choose to go on an app, I show my physique, I show a nice car, for example, and I know that's going to give me a certain type of reward in terms of, you're going to get people coming across and noticing your page. However, everything I'm doing in that point in time is firstly, I think is quite un-Islamic. I've got to cover my aura. I shouldn't be showing wealth. But on the other side of it, you've got people who don't necessarily understand wealth, because I've seen with people showing nice cars, watches, and all of the other materiality. People don't necessarily understand is you're swiping right on someone that has probably leased that car. That car's parked outside of his dad's house. The likelihood is he spent his entire salary on that watch and still living at home with his parents. I think that's kind of one of the problems nowadays, is that we do look for perfection, just like guys do. Guys are motivated by seeing women who look flawless. They have a certain physique about them. I think that's kind of where we've warped our views through what pretty much the general media are trying to direct us towards, sexualization of an individual rather than see them as a person.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm gonna give you an argument in relation to the Muslim marriage search, and I want you to give your views on that. So the argument is that subconsciously, most British Muslims don't actually want marriage. They want the benefits of marriage without responsibility. People want companionship, but not commitment, where marriage has become optional, not a priority. What's your thoughts around this?
Okay, I think there are several layers like an onion here. It'll be easy to generalize, but I think if we approach this on the basis of the first part, is someone actually looking for marriage, or what are they actually looking for in marriage? Some people, whether it's, let's just say, a divorced person, perhaps they're looking for, a wife or a husband, and they've got kids, kind of want to reestablish a family nuclear structure. You also got kind of one thing that people look at as marriage as convenience, a way to escape their families so that they can go and do all the stuff they wanted to do, travel and all that sort of thing. Marriage is also actually what people don't realize is a freedom, provided you're with the right type of person who has the understanding of Islam. But there is also another side to this as well, which I've been hearing a lot more about on social media these days, is the rise of, although it's probably a minority, of what's called a lavender marriage. Now, this in itself is someone from the LGBT community trying to find themselves a husband or wife for them to pretty much live in secret, I guess. That's also another thing that's being touted about now with other platforms and matchmakers. I think some of these apps are allowing those sort of behaviors. They're facilitating those sort of behaviors because you can now go onto apps and look for friends. Those friends can be of the same gender. I think that's also kind of a worrying sign as to the direction we're also heading into. But there is also another option that I think people are talking about, but I think there's a lot of misunderstanding and potential misuse here. And this goes back to the Dunning-Kruger effect, where you've got people who are not qualified to speak on this. I'm not qualified to speak on any of these topics here. I'm coming based on my own experiences and what I read. So nobody should take this as advice. I recommend everyone go to your scholar, go to a sheikh, and seek information, seek knowledge off of them. Now, this other option I've heard quite often is temporary or conditional marriages. On the face of it, sounds pretty good. You can marry someone for you can keep them for maybe a certain amount of days a week, a part-time marriage essentially. I think those are the sort of things where we are changing the scope of what marriage was intended for. And I think those things are quite dangerous to your family and yourself.
Yeah. Okay. And another argument that is put forward is that one of the reasons why marriage isn't happening for many people is because the perspective in the society is that marriage is optional and not really a priority. Do you agree or disagree with that?
I actually agree. I think it is optional for a lot of people. I looked into this. Sharia Council mentioned something between 30 to 40% of Muslim marriages fail within the first 5 years. I've spoken to two doctors of psychology who are also sheikhs, one at East London Masjid and another one at Palmer's Green Masjid in London. Both of them very clear about how marriage has impacted people. Marriage should be a form of freedom. It should be a way for you to grow. And I think when people go into marriage with the expectation of it's going to fail or if I don't get what I want, I'm out of here. So this is kind of one of the issues we're now seeing. And I think this is why I think people are maybe treating marriage as an option, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, that's fair enough. Okay. Um, let's move on to the subject of what I call fear-based marriages. And the question I'm asking you is fear a valid reason to marry? So, for example, again, a narrative that is pushed in this day and age, in my opinion, is that people say that options get worse after 30. So using that as an example, essentially, you're putting fear into the hearts of individuals who are post 30 years of age. So back to my question, is fear a valid reason to marry?
I think fear should be a stimulant for you to get your act together. It should certainly not be a reason to get married because you feel like you're going to be left on the shelf or whatever other insult people can hurl towards you. I think whether you are 20 or even approaching your 50s and you've been divorced with kids and everything else in between, I think marriage should be available to everyone and anyone. It's our Islamic right. And I do think nobody should feel like they can't have what is allowed for them. But when it comes down to fear, I think people need to maybe rethink where their thought process is going. If you are in a place where you've hit your 30s, you've not been married before, I think one of the biggest issues here is, yeah, of course, fear does play its part. People get to the stage where they're like, I've been looking for so long, I've tried all of these things and it isn't working. Maybe it's a case of understanding of what you're actually looking for. I don't think what you bring to the table is something worth really discussing, but I do think what is important is to understand what the individual is going through at that point in time and what their motive for marriage is. If motive is a marriage for you to be free from your family or restrictions or because you want to have kids or be able to travel wherever, then use that to motivate. Use that as a tool to motivate you, but don't restrict yourself. And I think people have such innate fears of what they hear from other people. And this is kind of the problem we have within society these days. Social media is such a toxic place. You have unqualified people giving life advice. Now, here's one of the things that I've kind of noticed. The people that are fear mongering, have you noticed how they never tell you whether they are qualified in a specific field? They never tell you about they had an arranged marriage that their paternal line, their families did, their father put them through. They got married to their cousin, who they're related to, and that didn't work out. But yet their response will be to traumatize everyone else. All men are this, all women are that, but they won't tell you the truth of actually what happened beforehand. Nobody does that because they know their argument will pretty much fall by the wayside. I think we need to start seeing people for what they are. A lot of people out there are attention seeking, and there's nothing negative from that perspective, but they are online, they're venting. They haven't had a place or a person or a channel to vent their frustrations. So what they do is they go online and they share everything from their own perspective. And remember, they'll never tell you about what they did to their partner, how they acted, how they ended the marriage. Did they decide to go down the haram route of, the financial side? Did they take away the kids? Did they, all of these sort of things? There are lots of questions up in the air, but people tend not to ask those questions because it's easier to jump on the bandwagon to follow someone who is vocalizing what you're feeling. It's kind of like a hive mind. When
Yeah.
people are when people are saying something you think about, maybe you don't believe in, but you think about, you haven't experienced it yourself, you're still going to back them up. And that's kind of a dangerous thing.
Talking of online, right? Is there a connection between online toxicity and the marriage search or the marriage search mindset? What would you say?
It's a good question because it kind of directly touches on the last one in terms of the fear. The social media is, I think it's hugely detrimental. I mean, let's face it. If I was to give your listeners a potential, whether it's the sisters or the brothers listening, whether it's for their children or whether it's for their parents, who knows, but or their friends, but would you marry someone who spends all night on social media talking to people that they don't know, likely to never meet? Would you consider this person for marriage who pretty much is online till 4 o'clock in the morning regularly? They spend more time on social media than they do at work. That type of person is likely to be quite lazy. They've got very bad routines. They've definitely got health issues. Most likely they've got social issues, anxieties, insecurities, inability to communicate. Would you consider that as a potential partner? Now, for those of you saying no, why would you spend time with those people on social media? And I think this is kind of one of the issues that we're finding on a regular basis is what people say and what people do. Two different things. People are happy to be around the worst of, the worst of society. But yeah, it's kind of like one of your other questions I read was they're happy to talk to us, but they're not willing to consider us, you know. And I think what social media brings, and this is my own experiences watching, we've got married women, we've got married men sitting on live 3, 4 times a week, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. They've got probably a husband sitting there sleeping upstairs. They've got the kids upstairs. Why are they sitting with single people? You've got to ask yourself, is that an erosion of the trust? I'm sure people will probably be making excuses for this, but Ask yourself, would you want your partner being around someone, a group of singles, without you being there all night, most nights? I think that's kind of where our problem is. And I think that stokes a lot of the issues that we have because now this is a way of taking away our wali, taking away the wali, taking away the Islamic side of being able to get to know someone. Don't forget, there's something called parasocial relationships. Simply put, when someone is online on a regular basis, their viewers have an expectation to see them, they watch them from afar. There's no real interaction or conversation. As a result, people develop feelings for that person. But that's one-sided. This person may not even know who you are. They may see you as a friend. What happens then? What's the detriment to your own emotions and your personality as a result of being indirectly rejected by someone who actually never knew you? I think these are all dangerous things that I think we have to get back to the reality, maybe the old ways. Get yourself out there, make yourself available. Ask yourself, you commute to work maybe 2 or 3 times a week. Maybe that's an hour, maybe that's 45 minutes for you to get to your office or come back. Okay, that's a small window. What about the rest of the time? Do you go to events, social events? There's lots available all over the UK. There's no excuses. But I think when we go back to the previous question in terms of fear, I think this is where the problem is that I think people are so used to sitting on social media because they've become so used to it. It's easy for them. Apps are easy to use. You just swipe away. You take on the traumas of other people when you go online. I've come across people on apps who have quoted me things that I've heard 20 other people say on social media. And I'm thinking to myself, why don't you have any sort of like uniqueness about you? Tell me about what you're actually thinking rather than regurgitating what someone else is saying. And I think that kind of restricts them in a way they don't even realize.
Okay, moving on to the next question then. A divorced person sometimes finds that once their status is known, interest in them drops sharply. They consider delaying disclosure just to be seen as a person first. And of course, we've already spoken about the stigma attached around being divorced in the past season. But here we have this balance of honesty against self-protection. And I guess what I'm trying to ask is, are we punishing halal experiences? That being divorce, of course.
I think it will affect everyone in one way or another within their lifetime, whether they go through it, whether their children or their parents or their friends, cousins, and so on and so forth go through it. Unfortunately, it's part of being a human. There are times where we're going to disagree, we're not going to get on, and it's still seen as a stigma within society, within our communities, not just South Asians, but all ethnic minority communities. These are stigmas that I've directly seen. I understand why someone will want to withhold certain information because they want to be seen as a person. But I think the over reliance on these apps, which allow this type of behavior, for you to reject someone based on the human side of them, instead, you can filter everyone out, whether they're a certain body weight, a height, location, and so on and so forth. We're pretty much all products. And if we look at ourselves as products or brands, maybe we need to look at what's going to be best for us. So we're going to put the best features of our product or our brand forward. I do think interest does drop sharply in two ways. Is if you've been divorced or you have kids. That's a massive issue for a lot of people. The other one is age. I've seen this firsthand. Going into an app, sorry, when you're in your late 20s to getting into your 30s. I've seen friends who've gone from their early 30s to mid 30s. Those matches swiftly drop. I can't give you any figures for this, but my opinion here would be something like 30 to 40% of your matches will drop off based on what I've seen. I reckon about 30 to 40% of your matches, could be more, could be less, but I do think it's probably around that sort of ballpark figure that you lose in terms of matches. How do you want to mitigate against that? Well, the easiest way to do that is structure what you're going to say and when you're going to say it. You might want to be honest about something further down the line. I don't agree with it, but I understand why people do it. From a personal standpoint, I think if you've been married before, you've done something halal. Whereas these days, and we're talking about punishing halal experiences, somehow a divorcee has to tell a family they've been married before. But Islamically, this person doesn't have to tell anyone about what they've been doing outside of marriage. Now let that sink in. because I think that's kind of a major flaw in our thinking. And I think this is something where we need more guidance from our sheikhs to clarify how that actually works. Because if you're rejecting someone based on them doing something halal, let's face it, I would much rather marry a woman that has been divorced 3 times than a woman who has done, whatever, God knows how many other times. Does that make sense?
No, yes, of course it makes sense. Of course it makes sense. Okay, and that brings me on to the next question. Again, another hot topic that just keeps rising again and again and again. The financial aspect in relation to the marriage. Obviously, once you've got married, these discussions are taking place prior to marriage within marriage meetings. Oh, I want to go for 50-50, as the brother says. Then you have the sisters that say, hold on, Islamically, it's 100% zero, where 100% financial responsibility is on the husband. But what's your thoughts around this?
This fast turns marriage into a sport for the rich. It's like skiing. You don't go skiing unless you have a certain amount. You earn a certain amount, and I think marriage should be for all, and we have to look back at our Sahaba, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We do have to look at what the reasons they got married, the circumstances they got married. That was all laid out. Our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was a walking Quran, and I think when we look at like his marriages, and you've got to think about and yes, we have to be practical about it. 2026. You know, um, we're not going through certain stigmas. We don't go through certain, we're not necessarily in the same sort of environment anymore. There's a lot more security we have, and people are allowed to plan ahead for their futures. And planning ahead for your future can be quite expensive. I do think one of the issues right now with the 50-50 mindset is I have to always ask that question. What have you been doing up until that stage? You know, I would hypothesize to some degree when you finished school, you went to college, whether you went to university or not, but during that period of time, surely you'd be working. What are you saving for? What are you doing with all those savings? Surely you should have something to fall back on. Surely you should have been, saving for your future. And doesn't mean, and there are people who have done that. It doesn't mean that you should be in a position where marriage is too expensive for you. It's like, okay, cool. If you've saved up, let's just say, I don't know, the amount to buy a house in London, I think statistically is about 503K. Yes, fine. Most people are not necessarily going to be able to save that much cash in a lifetime, but I think being realistic, the job for the husband is to provide a roof over her head. That's a right. That's her right. He needs to put food on the table and clothes on her back. And I think a lot of these guys need to be very clear on what they can and cannot do. You don't necessarily need to convince someone that this is what you can offer them. You just need to say, look, I think giving an excuse to say, hey, listen, cost of living, I can't provide you these are your rights and I can't provide them to you. I'm sorry, but I don't think anyone should be going into a marriage if you cannot provide the other person their rights. I strongly believe that. There are things that you can do to help yourselves. Yes, fine. There's nothing wrong with both of you saving up, or you should have saved up by the time you go to marriage stage. Maybe push that extravagant wedding, those rings, those clothes and car hires and venues and all that sort of stuff. Push that all back. Keep a simple wedding. Use that money to save up for a deposit. Nothing wrong with you getting a deposit for a house, maybe an hour, 2 hours away from your family home. You can always visit. We don't have to worry about going anywhere on foot anymore. You can drive. I think sometimes you have to be a bit more practical about it and maybe work together. Once you've got that house, then he can start paying for the house. He can start paying for the upkeep and everything in between. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And obviously, we'll have to see what a scholar says, whether that's okay or not. I do think maybe that's kind of a way around this argument of 50-50. I personally don't believe marriage should be 50-50 when it comes to the Islamic rights. You have to follow the rights. It's Islamic doctrine. It's clearly stated what we should and should not do. The moment you start bending those rules, well, What's stopping you from bending others?
Completely different subject. And that is green flags are more important than red flags. Agree or disagree?
I think I think it's a great question, but I would say let the wali decide. A man is a man. He has his own agency. He should be the one to make a decision. I don't believe anyone should be walking into marriage where they have no life experience or be able to make a decision for themselves to say, I've chosen this woman and it didn't work out. Hold your hands up and say it did not work out. Fine. But for a woman, I would say for sisters, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you protection. Your wali is there to protect you. Let him come and decide whether this guy is a red or green flag. Let him decide that. You yourself can say, listen, your dad, your father, your wali could turn around and say, hey, listen, I think this is a good guy. He's practicing X, Y, and Z. Fine. But you ultimately make that decision in the end. And that decision in the end, you've got to ask yourself, what is it for? Yes, fine, we can marry for 4 reasons, which we know. But you have to ask yourself, like, are those red flags? And I appreciate how there are nuances to this whole red flag scenario or green flag scenario. People often put their criteria. Hang on, you know, he's, you know, he- he's only 5'8". I want someone who's 6'3". That's a red flag. We've got to be realistic about the realities of what marriage is. And I think more people need to speak to people that have been married and have been divorced. I think it's really important to have that conversation with those type of people because they will tell you about the nuances. They'll tell you about waking up next to your partner, having different sleep routines, wake up routines, having different eating habits. Those are really the type of red and green flags that you can pick up on that you will never consider. When people say you only know someone when you live with them, I think those are the people who have no real life experience. Maybe they don't have critical thinking. I'm going to ask a potential wife, what are you like in this scenario? Do you find yourself getting angry? Do you find yourself raising your voice? Who do you raise your voice to? I want to know because those are questions that will answer whether how she will treat me, how she'll treat my family, how she treats her family as well, how she'll treat people around her. If she's stubborn, if she's argumentative, can be aggressive, if she has, narcissistic traits like ghosting people and stuff or stonewalling people, that sort of thing those, in my mind, those are the biggest red flags you can find in anyone. And I appreciate I'm speaking on the sister here, but I'm actually mean by men and women. And I think these are sort of things that you should really ask yourself. The day-to-day life, the stuff that you're going to see each day. Yes, fine, you're going to see family. Are they going to be family oriented and all that sort of stuff? That might be a green flag for you. He might drive a nice car. She might have a good physique. As far as it goes, ask yourself about the little things, about the day-to-day stuff. And if you can get those little things right, everything else can fall into place. And I think the biggest issue we have right now is an understanding of what a red and green flag should be. We're told red flags are if he's short or if he is 50-50. Green flag is if he's going to pay for everything, red soul shoes, take you on holidays and stuff like that. They're all green flags. But if he treats you like trash, maybe you need to reevaluate what your understanding of a red and green flag are. I hope that helps.
No, that does, that does. And in light of everything that we've said so far in this episode, what do you think the solutions are to the problem of the difficulties in finding a spouse in today's day and age?
I touched on this earlier. I think it's so obvious as far as I'm concerned. Ask yourself how often you are available. I'll give you an example. I spoke to one of my friends and suggested a marriage event for him several times in, week after week. And one of the things I want to do is just make sure any of my friends who I know that are single are aware of events that are going on. The key thing here is his response was quite negative. Negative in the sense where he was like, oh, I'm going to spend time with my family. I can be quite facetious. I asked him, oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize you haven't seen your family in ages. Have you moved out? Response was, no, I live with them. So you've seen your family all week. You live with them, but you can't spare time to find yourself a spouse. If you were to put your dad on the phone, this applies to both women and men. Put your dad on the phone and ask him. And, I'd love to ask him, why is it you want to keep your child single? They're going to turn around and say, absolutely not. Go get married. They want you to leave home. They want you to get on with your life. They want you to put yourself out there. I think, and this goes back to your other question about fear. It's a fear of rejection. It's a fear of maybe the worry of meeting the wrong person. Look, you've got your family are the best, cheerleaders you're ever going to get. They will back you to the end of the world, and what's wrong with taking one of them with you? And for those of you who don't, and we know there's many reverts, subhanAllah, come to Islam and they struggle. And again, there's plenty of places to help you. It's about, and if someone says no, if the place doesn't offer you help, there's many others. And I'm sure if any reverts are listening, they can contact divorced Muslims for some information. I'll certainly post some information for you on that. But I think making excuses not to go out, making excuses not to leave home. There's hiking events all over the UK. There's social events all over the UK. We've got apps, we've got marriage aunties, we've got marriage events. We have more choices available to us in ways to get married than what's happened than everyone else has had in the last 2, 3, 4 generations, probably even longer. We don't have to wait for that family enclave meeting or clan meeting and someone's going to be brought up as, look, this son's come of age, he wants a wife. You know, we don't have to deal with that anymore. We're able to make our choices, but you have to make yourself available. Having your hidden profile, shying away from telling people that you're single and you're looking for a marriage. Well, what are you trying to do? You can't look for a husband or a wife whilst on incognito mode. Someone's got to see you. You might be able to see everyone else, but you need people to be able to see you. And there's nothing wrong with you telling your friends, hey, I'm looking for marriage. I'm looking for this type of person. You just never know what you're going to come across with. But you've got your family backing you. You've got your wali protecting you. What more could you want?
Okay, and final question. Why is a man who is divorced often seen as quote unquote experienced, but a divorced woman is seen as quote unquote baggage?
I'll be honest with you, for the South Asians, the Turkish, Kurdish, Somali, and every other community of people I know or have come across, I can tell you now, I don't think that's actually true. Someone who is divorced is seen as a man who's divorced is seen as experienced. I think in reality, what happens is families will often come up with the notion that, oh, he must have done something wrong or she did something wrong. And I think that's the kind of backward cultural behavior we have that kind of rules, the decision the single person is going to make. Imagine going to an event and sitting there and saying, yeah, I was married before. The amount of people, I've seen this previously myself. Women have to reveal that they've got children straight away. I'm a big proponent of when you're sitting in front of someone at a marriage event, give them no information other than tell them about yourself, what you like doing. Maybe say, okay, I live in this area, but that's it. Have a conversation with people. Don't talk about your age. Don't talk about your life history or anything like that. If someone wants to match you, let them match you. You sit and ask them, why did you match me? I liked what you said about this. Okay, cool. Well, before we proceed, X, Y, and Z, you can give them the details about whether you've got kids, you've been married before, how old you are, and stuff like that. And I think that's a really good way of being able to broach that issue of being judged before you're actually seen. And when people talk about this whole baggage thing, I think that anyone who does that judging, whether, a woman who's got children, she's judged because she's got children. What do you expect? Do you want her to just abandon her kids? Well, what's that going to do from an Islamic perspective? What do you want? It's like, I think I think anyone doing that sort of thing, where do we draw the line? Should I be looking down on anyone who is 6'2" or below because I'm taller than them? Should I be looking down on people who earn less than me or people that speak a certain way? Because I think, hey, listen, if we're gonna judge people for something that they have really not had control over, hey, listen, there's a whole load of things. I've got a list of things I want to say to people, but in reality, you know what? We're supposed to be good humans. We look back at we look back into the Quran. I don't remember a single verse in any Quran in the Quran or any Hadith that suggested that a woman with a child or a woman that's divorced is baggage. And I'd love for someone to tell me otherwise, which I know for a fact you won't. But because it's not there. I think when society or social media influences your decision, when social media tells you you should go for a guy who's over a certain height, when social media tells you that, oh, he needs to do this or she needs to be like this, I think that's where you're kind of in a real critical juncture. There's something called metacognition, which is basically, in layman's terms, is thinking about what you think about. So thinking about thinking. And that sort of critical thinking, I think, is remiss within society these days. People are so indoctrinated in following than they are in leading. And this is kind of the big thing where we as Muslims need to be leaders. Brothers on social media, you need to be policing each other. We can't be having this homosocial relationships that a lot of brothers on social media have. They won't ever condemn or stand up against another brother who's done something wrong, especially towards their sister. Won't ever say that. That's where the homosocial relationships come in. They don't say this. But then we've also got the sisters. Where's that critical thinking? You've got a woman who's telling you about all the bad things all men have done. But what she won't tell you is that how many guys has she been speaking to? Her bad experiences of marriage, was that coming from her marrying her cousin that her dad's told her to marry? Maybe that issue is pretty much at home rather than all men. The problem is when people pick up social media trends, which I think is an absolute attack on your mind, I think that's where we start degrading as a society. We need to stop following these social media influencers. And I'll be honest with you, I've looked at a couple of these digital social media influencers, Dawas, and the people, Dawa brothers, and the people associated with them who go live with them. I spent some time listening to what they had to say. I've asked them certain questions. You realize you're surrounded by people, again, that Dunning-Kruger effect, people that are unqualified to speak on the topics that they give advice on. You'd never go to a Chinese herbal clinic for medical advice. Why would you do that for your Iman, for your Islamic rights? You go to people with no real qualifications in what they're talking about, but yet it's a great time pass. Maybe what people really need to do, and I know I've gone off piece here, but I think this is quite an important thing, is that maybe we need to start walking away from social media, maybe limiting time to social media. Go on social media whilst you're in the gym. Maybe you're doing a knitting class, pottery, whatever you want to do, but do something different. So this way you can move away from these sort of negative connotations people have towards divorced people. I think men are seen as experienced when they're divorced because there's that kind of connotation, within a really bad connotation within Muslim cultures in the UK, boys will be boys. Whereas for a woman, it's always, like with anything, like with society, we know the biggest and the best way, the most efficient way to attack Islam is through its women. You attack a guy, you go for his woman. That's unfortunately what we're facing nowadays.
We got to end this episode with a rapid fire round, my friend. Can't go without a rapid fire. Yeah, you ready for this?
I'm always ready.
Okay. Right. So once you're married, where would you take your spouse to eat on a first date?
First date, I would take her to the Ivy in Leeds. It was a great visit.
What is the best age to get married?
The halal age.
What percentage of British Muslims, in your opinion, are serious about marriage?
80%.
If your spouse says to you that they want you off social media, what would be your first response?
I was going to say happy wife, happy life, but that's actually a narcissistic thing to do. So I would say we can both remove ourselves. I'll take her out on an expedition or something. So yeah.
How long should one get to know a potential before making the decision to marry them?
The smarter you are, the quicker the decision. The less life experience or lower competency you have, take as much time as you need, but make sure your wali is present.
What method is the most effective to find a spouse? Apps, marriage events, matchmakers, matrimonial websites, marriage bureaus?
Well, I would say this: apps, marriage events, matchmakers, websites, and bureaus, all of them have very low success rates. And I would say, from a balance of probability, sign up to all of them. Make yourself available on weekdays and weekends as much as you can. You increase your chance. So 5% on marriage apps and 5% on marriage events. Do them both, you get a 10% chance. Why not increase it by doing all of them?
Would you sign a prenuptial agreement?
No, but I would highly recommend both men and women speak to a financial consultant about trust. Because as much as you might be worried about your spouse taking your wealth, which is obviously in most cases will be haram, what you want to do is make sure the tax man isn't rubbing their fingers for any time that money moves.
Mental health or physical health?
You can't have physical health without having your mental health. And mindfulness is probably the most important thing.
What do you think it takes to be in a marriage that lasts forever?
Trying to outdo each other on good deeds for each other.
Interesting. Okay, if there was a book written on you, what would be the title of the book?
Fortitude.
And finally, what do British Muslims say privately but hesitate to admit publicly?
Everything in their criteria
My
is a
friend,
sham.
well, thank you very much, brother Enigma, for joining the episode today. Any final points before we let you go?
All I have to say is that, look, if I've said anything that's offended anyone, all I ask is you to forgive me. Remember those in need in your du'as. We certainly need that these days with everything that's going on. But we are an ummah at the end of the day. You don't necessarily have to protect people on another side of the world, but we have seen people doing so. But there's nothing stopping you from protecting the people on this side of the world either. Look out for each other and always question where information is coming from. Feel free to take a recording of this and take it to your sheikh. Ask him to fact check so we know what's said is right and what's said is wrong.
Jazakallah khair for that. Barakallahu feek. If you want to be a guest on this podcast or if you want to contact us, then please email us. Our email address is divorcedmuslims@gmail.com.